Did you know that the Ghostbusters is actually a ripoff of a show from the 1970s starring a gorilla? You've heard of the Real Ghostbusters. Today, on the Nostalgia Files, we take a look at the original Ghostbusters. Did you ever realize that 1984 was basically the greatest year for movie releases in all of history? In one single year, we got The Terminator, Neverending Story, Nightmare on Elm Street, Gremlins, Footloose, 16 Candles, Karate Kid, Dune, Revenge of the Nerds, Red Dawn, This is Spinal Tap, The Last Starfighter, Children of the Corn, and, last but not least, a little horror sci-fi comedy film you might know as Ghostbusters. And to say that this movie was a big deal would be putting it so lightly, you'd make Michael Jackson's skin tone jealous. The film was conceived of by SNL comedian Dan Aykroyd based on his obsession with and belief in the paranormal, and was originally meant to star him and fellow SNL cast members Eddie Murphy and John Belushi. After Murphy passed on the script and Belushi tragically passed away in real life, the script for the film went into development, being written by Aykroyd and SCTV alum Harold Ramis, directed by Ivan Reitman, and starring a whole cast of some of the funniest people that have ever appeared on camera, including Ramis, Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, and Bill Murray as the eponymous Ghostbusters themselves. The movie was a runaway success, earning critical praise, $229 million in ticket sales, a #1 spot at the box office for 7 consecutive weeks, and a #1 spot in the heart of every kid who grew up in the 80s and 90s. Ghostbusters quickly became a cultural phenomenon, instantly sparking a sequel and tons of merchandising. Heck, it even got a Saturday morning cartoon show titled The Real Ghostbusters. But wait, why was it called The Real Ghostbusters, you might have asked yourself as a kid? It was strange that the live-action movie featuring real actors was just Ghostbusters, while the decidedly not real cartoon version added the real in the title. And yes, to an 11-year-old kid with no understanding of copyright law or property licensing, this was very confusing. But there was one specific and very interesting reason for the name change.
We're the Ghostbusters. I'm Spencer. He's Tracy. I'm Kong.
You see, there was already a show called The Ghostbusters, and it existed a full decade before the movie came out. It was a 1975 slapstick comedy titled The Ghostbusters, about 2 bumbling detectives and their pet gorilla who traveled from town to town investigating paranormal occurrences, and it was weird to say the least. It was sort of like a bizarre, low-budget, live-action version of Scooby-Doo, starring 2 veteran TV actors and a guy in a gorilla suit riding around in a dune buggy. It starred Forrest Tucker and Larry Storch of F Troop fame, and ran for 15 episodes before being canceled. And while it was a very short-lived show, that didn't change the fact that a company called Filmation Studios still owned the rights to the name Ghostbusters in 1983 when Ramis and Aykroyd's movie was going into production at Columbia Pictures. During pre-production for 1984's Ghostbusters, many alternate titles were discussed for the film, including Ghost Stoppers, Ghost Breakers, and Ghost Smashers, but eventually Filmation agreed to sell Columbia the rights to the name for $50,000 plus a 1% of the film's profits. So the film moved forward with the Ghostbusters title. It came out, it was a smash success. Filmation didn't make any money from their 1% deal because technically, based on shady Hollywood accounting, the movie never turned a profit. It became an instant classic, yada yada yada, and the rest is history. But then, in 1986, things got complicated. Filmation, the studio that originally owned the Ghostbusters name, if you're keeping score, was working with Columbia Pictures to develop a cartoon version of the Ghostbusters movie. Saturday morning cartoons were the ultimate cash cow in the late 80s, and Filmation wanted to get in on some of that sweet Ghostbusters licensing action, presumably because their 1% profit deal was such a bust. At the last minute, however, the deal fell through, and Columbia decided to work with Deke Entertainment on the show instead. Deke was responsible for such classic cartoons as Inspector Gadget, Care Bears, Captain Planet, G.I. Joe, Street Sharks, and 80% of the rest of your childhood memories. Most importantly though, they worked quickly and cheaply, so it ended up being a no-brainer to go with them over the slower and more expensive Filmation. Fueled by anger at being dumped for Deke, and possibly still peeved at being stiffed out of their 1% of the movie's profits, Filmation decided to pull the ultimate troll move of all time. They were going to resurrect the original 1975 The Ghostbusters TV show and turn it into a different Saturday morning cartoon called The Ghostbusters. After all, they still owned the name and were only licensing it to Columbia Pictures. They were free to do whatever they wanted with it. So, in 1986, 5 days before Columbia Pictures and Deke could premiere their Ghostbusters cartoon based on the 1984 film written by Aykroyd and Ramis, Filmation released The Ghostbusters, an animated version of the 1975 show about 2 goofy detectives and a gorilla fighting ghost crime. It might have had one of the most bizarre premises in television history and have absolutely nothing to do with the smash hit film starring Bill Murray that popularized the Ghostbusters name, but Filmation beat Columbia to the punch lunch by a whole business week. Columbia and Deke, most likely pissed by this flagrant display of television tomfoolery, decided to retitle their show The Real Ghostbusters to differentiate it from the other show and also give a subtle middle finger to Filmation by insinuating that their version of the show wasn't the real one, despite technically being the originator of the name. So there you have it. Your favorite beloved sci-fi comedy from the 80s was technically derivative of some weird show from the 70s starring a guy in a gorilla costume driving around in a dune buggy. And the cartoon version was called The Real Ghostbusters because movie studios are more petty than a football stadium full of reality TV stars. Chalk it up as another case closed for the Nostalgia Files.